One. Hey, everybody, welcome back to Capitalist Culture. Today we are talking with Sandeep Dayal, one of the world's top marketing strategists and the managing director of Sorrenti Marketing Group. He's advised global leaders at Pfizer, AbbVie, HSBC, and Kraft, and his groundbreaking work in cognitive branding reveals how human behavior truly drives trust, influence, and growth. This conversation will definitely change the way you think about leadership and persuasion. Sandeep, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me on your show, Kip. This is a great opportunity to talk to your audience. I love it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, super excited to have you. Well, maybe we'll kind of dig right in. You work with some of the biggest global brands in history, as I shared. What originally draw you into the intersection of strategy, psychology, and branding of all things?
Yeah. I guess it's the flow of life, but the way it all started was long back. When I finished my engineering school, it seems like decades and decades back, and it was decades and decades back. But I was kind of always this odd fit of a guy. I didn't ever want to do like a regular job or something like this. So I was always looking to be an entrepreneur and what have you. And at that time, which was in the 80s, I ended up sort of building this business around using microprocessors. So this is the early robots and so on, automating machinery and so on. So I was building these systems using microprocessors and microcontrollers to help automate machinery, which was kind of the predecessors for robotics, the robotics revolution, if you will. But it was interesting. What it led me to discover about myself was that I was the kind of guy that used to just like doing problem solving. And usually the work that I was getting was the work that nobody else wanted to do because it was
Okay.
just so non-standard, right? So, it was kind of everybody walking in with a unique problem and then saying, "Hey, can you solve this problem?" And I'd say, "Yeah, sure, I'll do it." And, even without even knowing whether I could or not, I would usually volunteer to do it. And that kind of revealed to myself that in essence, I was someone that was a problem solver.
Hmm.
Right. And I loved doing it. I was like, I would seek out problems to solve. And as soon as the problem was solved, I would almost get bored with it. So it was just my nature. And that sort of over time led me into consulting work because consulting work, if you will. So I worked for Booz, I worked for McKinsey. And in essence, the work that you do there is about solving business problems, right? And understanding if there's a unique and complex situation. Nobody ever hires you to solve a simple problem. People usually hire you because they have a complex problem for which they're willing to pay somebody money to solve it. So, I worked with, as you and I were talking about, I worked with about, over my lifetime in consulting, I probably worked with over 100 companies all over the world, so in the United States, in Europe. Well, actually, there are some exceptions. United States, Europe, Asia, and Latin America, South America. I haven't done any work in Eastern Europe and I haven't
Okay.
done any work in Africa. But other than that, pretty much everywhere I've worked with global businesses, just solving one problem after another. And that, that makes you learn a lot. Every day you sort of say to yourself, "Hey, that was interesting. I didn't know that." And so that whole process of learning through experience and through interactions with other people who are very smart in their own industries and so forth is kind of very energizing. So that's been my flow of life, if you will.
Yeah. Any particular, obviously got to protect client confidences, but any particular problems that come to mind that was just a really interesting one or one that just kind of sticks out in your mind that you help
Wow.
solve?
Um, no, I've worked on many, many different things, from everything from working with Philips to, figure out whether or not they could save the television, the old television tube industry, right?
Huh.
Working with United and the Chicago city of Chicago to figure out what to do about O'Hare, the airport. How do they handle the growing need for more capacity while handling also opposition from people that live around O'Hare saying, hey, we don't want more flights. And at the same time, you're running the biggest airport in the country.
Right.
So, how do you get around those types of complicated issues? And none of those things have simple answers. A lot of the work that I've done more recently has been in the healthcare industry. So, and I love working in the healthcare space because this is, you can talk about, I'm a marketer. So,
Uh-huh.
marketing is everything. And a lot of, usually people talk about marketing in the consumer world. But having done consumer marketing, it's much more exciting doing marketing in the healthcare world
Okay.
than doing marketing on how I can sell more cornflakes, right?
Hmm.
That part doesn't impact that many people's lives. It's not life changing, but what you do in healthcare can often be very life changing. So, a lot of my work more recently has focused on how do you get very complicated drugs to market. How do you get, and this is where some of the work that, we were talking about the cognitive piece.
Yeah.
This is where a lot of my focus became in understanding the consumer deeply. Now, mind you, everybody says that, yeah, of course, we want to understand the consumer deeply. Who doesn't want to understand the consumer deeply? But really doing that well is a science and an art. And understanding how to change people's behavior
Hmm.
is a very difficult problem. And we see this in our personal lives, right? I mean, you and I, everybody, we're all stubborn, right? Nobody's
Right.
just, yeah, so this is cool, that's cool. Now, when anytime things matter, people get, it's very difficult to change their minds. And as a marketer, oftentimes particularly when you're coming out with, and this is important for your audience, for the people that are entrepreneurs in your audience, and even otherwise, that often you have to understand how do you change people's behavior? And that's fundamentally a very, very difficult human problem.
Hmm.
And so that's a lot of my work has, in fact, involved that. And, that's an area in which I'm published and I have a book.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe in that vein, but maybe dialing it back a little further, just maybe uh, how did your early work in McKinsey and Booz help shape the way you think about leadership and influence and changing the behavior
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
people?
So I think at the end of the day, if you look at companies like Booz and McKinsey, the BCGs of the world, it's all about teaching you how to think.
Mm.
And that's a very difficult thing to learn because you can't just pick up a book. And there are books, by the way, that says how to think, but it's not so easy. And it's kind of like somebody asking you, how do you do all these great podcasts that you always do? Because there are a million people that do podcasts, but you have a great following, and there's an art to these things. And similarly, it's at the end of the day, the most valuable thing that you can do for yourself is learn how to think, because at the end of the day, then when you set up your businesses or you're working in a business, um, you have to know how to take a particular problem, how to decompose it in an objective manner, and really understand the issues, because you don't want to be the guy that's working on the wrong problem. You
Mm.
don't want to be the guy that's working on the wrong pain point for the consumers, right? If you start with both of those uh, incorrect places to start, everything else that follows is going to be also incorrect, and you can pay a very heavy price for that. And by the way, that's not just for entrepreneurs. You can see um, even big companies sometimes make big mistakes. Even when you take very respected companies like Meta.
Uh-huh.
Remember why they changed their name to Meta?
Yes.
Because they thought they were going to be the metaverse.
Yeah.
And and that was a gigantic failure, and they spent $10 billion on that stuff. So I mean, I think when you go back and start decomposing these things, well, it's always, easy to be smart in hindsight, but nonetheless, you should do hindsight just so that you want to learn from your mistakes. And very often the answer is the same, that you were solving the wrong problem, or you were not thinking about the problem in the right way, or you didn't really understand your consumer.
Mm.
And I think if I look back at my time at McKinsey's and the and the Booz of the world, it's it's really that focus on making sure that you're doing the right things, from a business perspective, and just training yourself day after day. And you make mistakes. I mean, it's not like, when I worked at McKinsey, it's not like, every client that I worked with was a gigantic success. Some of them actually went down the tube.
Uh-huh.
But nonetheless, you do your best, and you exercise good judgment, and then, life is what life is,
Yeah.
you know.
It seems as though many leaders really struggle to connect authentically with their audiences, with their customers, with their teams. What would you think most leaders misunderstand about human decision making?
Yeah, I think sometimes, I mean, I think that's a great question. And I think sometimes it's, Kip, maybe it's just that people don't listen sometimes,
Mm.
right? Because you've got so many of your own thoughts in your head that you're not really listening to what the other person is saying. And let me give you an example from, some of the work that we did in healthcare and what have you. And so this, goes back 10 years. And I was working with one of the companies here, actually AbbVie, which is a large pharmaceutical company right here in Chicago. And they were at that time, and this is maybe more than 10 years now, actually, they had launched a drug called Humira,
Hmm.
which ultimately became one of the largest drugs in the world, right? And but here's what the problem was. For the longest time, for something like 30 years, there had been no solution, no good solution for patients that were suffering from rheumatoid arthritis. So they were just living with pain and what have you, and the physicians didn't have anything to offer them. So, the patients would go to the rheumatologist. Rheumatologist would say, okay, here's some Motrin, here's some
Right.
high dose Motrin, here's some methotrexate, which was like an old cancer drug, which was never designed for rheumatoid arthritis, but kind of did help with some of the symptoms. So for the longest year, that's what they were doing, and you didn't need any special training because though that's what the answer was going to be all the time. So, but when AbbVie launched the Humira, that was like a game-changing drug. It was a completely different kind of a drug, versus the small molecule or chemical-based drugs. This was a biologic drug, and it was one of the first few biologic drugs to be introduced. And even the physicians themselves were kind of wary of these drugs. So, you needed to change their behavior. Now, from the physician, you go to the patients, you have to change their behavior as well. That, hey, here's something that you're going to have to inject into yourself, and it's made from cells, and it's a biologic, and this, and people like, what are you doing to me? I've been living with pain for 30 years, and I think I'll be fine. I can live a few more years with that. So here I was doing this focus group. I was doing this in-depth interview with this woman. I still remember her name. Her name was Lisa, and I was talking to her about her disease and my thinking. And so this is again how I was thinking, right? So
Sure.
I was saying, hey, I've got this miracle drug. I just need to tell her that this miracle drug exists, and obviously she'll want it, right? And
Uh-huh.
and no, so I'm like talking to her and I'm getting deeper and deeper and I'm talking about how wonderful this drug is and she's not going to have all this pain that she's had for 30 years and so on. And she's kind of like listening but not listening and so on. And I'm kind of wondering like, what's wrong with this picture? I've got a miracle for you and why don't you want it?
Yes.
And ultimately, what she said to me was, she said that, look, Sandeep, if you don't, if you haven't gone through what I have gone through in my life,
Mm.
you don't understand it. How are you going to solve my problem? If you don't know what I've gone through, how
Mm.
are you going to solve my problem? And it sort of made me stop and think because I said, wait a minute, why do you care if I've gone through what you've gone through? I've got the miracle drug here, just take it. This is the one you should
Yes.
take and you'll be
Right.
fine. But she didn't want to take that step unless she could feel that we had that connection whereby she could feel that I understood how her life had gone. And what that led to is a series of campaigns that we did in which the main communication was around understanding, communicating that we understood what these people were going through. So, if you
Mm.
saw a television ad or if you saw a print ad, there was one print ad in which, you actually saw like a little girl sitting and, and you just see these hands, which are her mother's hands. And
Mm.
you could see her hands were like a little, bent out of shape because, that's what rheumatoid arthritis does to you. So, your hands and all get misshapen. But she was working on her little girl's hair and sort of tying them into a knot,
Mm.
braiding her hair. Now, for you and me who haven't gone through that would seem very simple. But for someone that has rheumatoid arthritis, they would see that and say that's impossible. For someone that is that
Mm.
serious a disease, that's impossible because their hands cannot do that unless they've gone through some kind of a miracle, right? So it was kind of the secret communication through those ads that we established with the patients to show them that we understood what they were going through, which is that they couldn't do the things, they couldn't make breakfast for their kids, they couldn't braid their hair, they couldn't dance with their husbands, and so on. Things that for us feel very normal. We had to establish that secret language with them, which we call brands with empathy now. But those brands connected with them, and that sort of then made them listen to what we were saying, because otherwise they were not even ready to listen to what we had to say. So that was now it's become very common. Every brand does that. At that time, it was very novel. 15 years back when we did that, it was kind of the first time somebody had done that in the healthcare space. And it worked really well. It was one of the things that I believe contributed to the drug being accepted by people, the
Mm.
behavior change happening, where people accepted the drug, physicians accepted the drug, and it went on to become one of the largest, if not the largest drug ever to be there. So it's it goes back to that whole notion of understanding and listening to your customers, right? I mean, we can all say, I could have just ignored this woman, but I think she gave me, when she said that one sentence, that
Mm.
if you haven't gone through what I've gone through, how are you going to help me? That one sentence sort of made me step back and just say, what did she just say?
Yeah.
What did I just hear? What's going on?
Huh.
You know, and that's the kind of insight that if you as a business manager, brand manager, or as an entrepreneur, if that's the insight that you tap in, then that's a great place to start, I would say.
Yes. Well, you may have just touched on this, but you've long predicted the rise of consumer collaboration and trust-based branding.
Yeah.
How did you see that coming long before the mainstream?
Yes, yeah, you're right. I mean, I wrote an article long back, when this was in, I think, 2000 and, maybe early 2000s. Yeah, I know that I wrote an article which was about trust, on building trust online. And that was when the internet had just started. And it was kind of a very interesting time, Kip, because everybody, for one, if you remember that time, this was the first internet bubble, if you will. That was,
Uh-huh.
I think around the 2000s or 2001 or so. And I was deep into that space. And again, that was another thing that, taught me to think about behaviors. But at that time, it was everybody expected internet to just kind of replace everything, right? People said, hey, the internet is going, you're going to be doing your banking on the internet, you're going to be buying your groceries on the internet and all of that stuff. And there were billions and billions of dollars that were spent on it. And then it just went poof, you know, and people didn't do it. Now people do all of those things on
Right.
the, but at that time, they didn't. And it was kind of one of those learning moments that certain things have to happen before um, people, behavior change is not something that you can sort of switch on and off with a button, right? And it took people a long time to learn that lesson. And, ultimately all of these things happen and they're happening now. And I believe that was the same mistake that Facebook at that time made with the metaverse.
Mm.
I think actually the metaverse is going to be a big deal in the future.
Yes. Right.
But it wasn't going to be the case that you just said, oh, we're going to now switch on the metaverse and everybody's just going to wear these glasses and that's it. They're going to live in another world. No, not yet. I think that a time will come when that part will be will be a significant part, that whole virtual world, that mixed reality will be a big part. And now it's beginning to happen more with the new meta glasses that are there
Mhm.
and so on, the virtual reality glasses. It's happening more now, but in a different way. And it'll, over the next 10 years, it will happen to a greater degree. But not understanding that fundamental lesson that somewhere along the road, you've got to build that trust. And you can call it trust,
Hmm.
which is where people have to essentially say, yeah, maybe I'm going to trust technology. And I was just reading an article in the New Yorker today where they talk about whether people are actually going to trust AI
Uh-huh.
more than they trust their doctors.
Yeah, right.
And the article is about that, what, that might actually happen because, because of a variety of things. So it's a trust is a trust is not a machine thing. Trust is a human thing.
Uh-huh.
And at the end of the day, I think it'll be interesting how the whole AI revolution moves along. But I think that whole understanding of um, the separations, the increasingly decreasing separations between what's human and what's machine. I think a clear understanding of that is going to always be a big part of at least the next 20 years. So who the heck knows after 20 years? But then
Hmm.
the next 20 years, that's what it's gonna be.
Yeah. How about tell us about the core idea behind cognitive branding and maybe how leaders can apply that not just in marketing, but in how they communicate and how they lead.
Yeah, yeah. So cognitive branding, at the end of the day, it's about the big focus, as I mentioned, is on behavior change. And what we noted about behavior change is that, whenever, whether you're an entrepreneur and so on, I think, and this is something that entrepreneurs often forget to do, which is to brand their products,
Hmm.
right? Because in the world that we're living in, right, many solutions are technology oriented, and technology is easy to copy. I mean,
Right.
you could potentially set a bank of 10 programmers who are really smart and they could build a Netflix for you. Okay,
Huh?
so that's not the problem. They can build a Netflix for you. The problem is Netflix as a brand,
Right.
right? So nobody will even know that these 10 guys created Netflix, because how are they going to find out? Even if they find out, how are they going to trust it, right? And Netflix is already there. So as you think about um, what your next product, what your next service, whatever it's going to be, you have to think about how you're going to brand it. Because at the end of the day, it is brands which are very difficult to copy. You can copy a product, it's hard to copy a brand. And what we found about brands is, and why is it hard to copy? Because the brand is kind of like a soul of a product.
Hmm.
So, when Kip, you and I talk, you can sort of send me your resume and I can send you my resume. But it's a different thing when we start talking,
Right.
right? And it's a different thing when, whatever, we go out and have dinner, or if we go out and, play volleyball on the beach. And so we learn about this other thing, that's this aura or this other thing that you cannot physically see, that's very much associated with you. And then that's when, Kip and Sandeep sort of start having a kind of a connection, an understanding of each other, a chemistry, and so on. That kind of thing that we talk about routinely with humans, yes, you have your body and you have your soul. That's actually present for brands.
Hmm.
That every brand, every time, it's just very human for us to read something else. When we go look at when we go look at, whatever it could be a bottle of rum. When you go and see, there's all kinds of other things that are associated with that bottle, which cannot be physically characterized.
Uh-huh.
So that's what those other things are, is what we put into that whole cognitive space or that behavioral space, and really understanding what those other pieces are that you can surround your product with. Because everybody can, so one way or the other, find a way to concoct rum. They can copy that bottle, they can put a label, but at the end of the day, what else goes around that surround is something that becomes very important. And that's what brands help us do. They help us build that surround around that product or the service.
Mm.
And it goes into all of that. I think when we were talking earlier about the example in rheumatoid arthritis with Lisa, I mean, we talked about one particular way to do it, which was around that empathetic connection with people. But
Yes.
there are many other ways. You can connect with people through values. You can connect through them by what we call wisdom levers, or other. There's many different ways to connect. And previously, before cognitive branding, people hadn't really focused on those things. People just said, you know what, if I, if here's product A and here's product B, and what's the difference between the two? Oh, okay, my product is whatever, red and your product is green. Okay, you're selling green apples, I'm selling red apples. That's it. That's my differentiation. That's my marketing.
Uh-huh.
But we're now beginning to learn that that's not all to it. There's all this other piece around what can make those apples seem different and more valuable. So that is on the branding thing. So, however, I think you asked a second question there, which is, how does this actually relate to people's leadership and
Right.
people's other aspects of their businesses. And I think it's actually quite fundamental to all of those aspects because um, whether you're talking about people, there's a lot of talk about personal brands,
Uh-huh.
right? What
Uh-huh.
is your personal brand? And people ask that question more and more in business. You've got 5,000 employees in your office, and what is your personal brand that distinguishes you and marches you onto that. And I think understanding that piece about yourself, like I said earlier in the conversation when we were started talking, that what I discovered through my experience was that I was essentially at heart a problem solver. I was at heart maybe a listener, that listened to
Mm.
people and tried to understand what was going on beneath the skin. And that's kind of my personal brand, maybe, you know. Um, but each person has to discover what that personal brand is, and it's very different. And when you do leadership, here's kind of what I tell people: you can look at people, you can admire them, and this is what I tell like associates and younger people in my company, that you can admire what I do, and many of them do, because I'm senior in the company, I'm the managing director, and this and that. I've
Right.
been there, done it all, so they kind of come out of the business schools and so on, and they say, you know what, I want to be like Sandeep. And you know and that's actually the wrong aspiration. you know
Mm.
what I tell them to do is, you don't want to be like me. You want to be like you. And what that means is, you have to understand what is it that is special, and what is it that is your style of leadership,
Mhm.
and then make that work for you. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's a different thing for each people. And I think as a leader, what you can do for people in terms of leading them is to help them discover their style
Yes.
and their strengths, so that you can help them succeed in their own way. Because if there is a just sort of make a list of, oh, here are all the things that Sandeep does, let me break that down into a 10-point program, and then I'm going to work on each of those no, that's that's not it. That's not going to work, because you're going to try to be somebody who you aren't. And you have to really self-reflect and become self-aware. Both those things are very difficult. Self-reflection,
Mhm.
self-awareness, these are difficult things to do, but you have to do those things to discover what is your own style of leadership, and then embrace it and make it work for you.
Yes.
You know?
Very good. How about, as you're consulting CEOs, what's the most common blind spot you see in how they position their companies or how they position themselves?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think when you start looking at CEOs, when you get to the top of the company, so I'm the managing director of my company. I think the blind spot is the absence of having a boss and absence of having peers,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Because you're the one guy at the top, so you don't have peers, and that is that can be a lonely place to be. So
Absolutely.
in many instances, if you're the CEO of a company, you have to create you have to create spaces around yourself where you can where you can get good counsel from other people. So one of the things, and this was something that was very much encouraged at McKinsey also. And consulting companies are a little different than I would say businesses, because in consulting companies you're partners. So in a way you are peers.
Hmm.
But even when you're peers, and even when you are other in other roles in the company, you're always encouraged to get mentors. You know,
Yes.
right? Make lots of mentors. You don't have to have just one mentor. In fact, that would be a mistake. Don't have one mentor.
Right.
Get multiple mentors for yourself. Surround yourself with mentors, and don't be afraid to do that. And surround yourself with experts. Sometimes people are very afraid uh, to surround themselves or have someone that's smarter than them.
Hmm.
Next to them, people feel, sometimes people can feel threatened that, hey, how come this guy can do what I don't do? And it's not a thing to be threatened by. It's a thing to say, oh, wow, I should surround myself by smart people. I should surround myself with mentors. And then you have this basis from which you can make the best decisions for yourself. At the end of the day, you're the guy that's going to make the calls, right?
Right. Right.
So at the end of the day, it's your decision. You're going to live by it, and so on. But there's a lot of value to immersing yourself in a lot of good thoughts. And I think one of the key mistakes, whether it's CEOs in business or any kind of CEOs, I think a lot of times the mistake they can make is to not do that, which is, kind of let yourself become this guy that's sitting at the top of the hill in a little box. And, you're kind of at the top of the mountain. And from time to time, all those people that work for you, march up the mountain and present, all their plans, and you kind of bless them or, pick them apart or something, but that's all you do. And I think, uh, it, uh, it doesn't work. And the other piece that I tell CEOs, speaking of mountain analogies, is that CEOs always expect the mountain to come to them. And
Right.
sometimes it's
Yes.
actually important to go to the mountain. And I've seen many CEOs, you'll go to them because I've worked with very large companies, Fortune 500 companies, and so
Yeah.
on. So these are very large companies, and you can have these CEOs sitting in a building that is all the top C-suite people and their lawyers and their staff and so on. They're sitting in one building and everybody else is in another building and so on. And sometimes they never get out of that building,
Mm.
you know. And,
Yes.
and you got to say, hey, don't always expect the mountain to come to you. Sometimes Muhammad has to go to the mountain. You know?
Uh-huh.
So, so you have to do that. And I think there's somebody much wiser than me had one time told me that, hey, you should manage by walking around,
Yes.
and you should, and so you should, get out of that building that you're in and go and go walk around in your businesses, go walk into people's office. Sometimes that can be very scary for those people if the CEO suddenly walks in unannounced into their office.
Uh-huh.
But nonetheless, if you do it often enough, people say, this guy walks around and he,
Yeah.
sits, so I think that is there. Now, obviously, with the pandemic,
Mm.
some of that became difficult
Right.
because people weren't going to the office, and I'm a big believer of people actually coming back to offices and so on for reasons like that. I like that physical interaction. I like being able to go and walk around to people's offices and just shoot the breeze or talk about something that's on my mind and just say, hey, what do you think of this, without it feeling like it's too choreographed. Um, um, but yeah, I mean, I think those are not the only things, but certainly important things in terms of being successful as a CEO.
Yeah. What? What do you think entrepreneurs can learn from Fortune 500 leaders about creating lasting trust?
Yeah. Um, I think I would say that the Fortune 500 companies, what they do very well is, it's both a positive and a negative, but what they do very well is to put systems into
Hmm.
place. And I think systems and processes, so that there is some kind of a method to the madness. And I think, and I think what happens is that as entrepreneurs go from being small to, and sometimes many of these businesses are just exploding. They're
Uh-huh.
just rising so fast and so on. And I think when that happens is that suddenly get to a point where you've grown a lot. You're no longer a small business. You've grown a lot, and you need some kind of processes and methods to keep things working like a machine. At some point you do need to become that machine that just kind of works and doesn't go off the rails. And you've seen some of those things go south when people don't do that. You've seen some fast growing companies that flame out
Mhm.
because they were still doing the crazy things that they were doing when they were five people. They were
Right.
still doing the same crazy things when they were 5,000 people. And so I think that's one of the things that Fortune 500 companies do very well. They also do a very good job, I think, of developing people.
Yes.
So with many of my clients, because they're global companies, they move people around. They'll say, okay, you know what, Kip, you've done this for the last 3 years. You've been very successful. And instead of just, making you keep doing the same thing over and over again, let's move you to something else. And, now you did a great job in operations. Let's move you to marketing. Oh, you did a great job in the US business. Let's see how you do if we send you to Malaysia. And
Uh-huh.
so if you look at many of these big companies, when you see their CEOs are usually people that have floated around
Right.
in the companies. It used to be the case that it was kind of the person that was on the sales side of the business,
Uh-huh.
and they would keep making big sales and this and that. They'd be kind of a hero, and they'd ultimately be made. That's less and less the case now. You're looking for people that have that broad perspective, that broad experience. And so that's the other thing that I advise people to do, that are people that are younger in their career, take those opportunities. Don't get too comfortable in one job. And anytime you get very comfortable and very successful in doing something, it's time to look for a change. And ask the company to give you something else. Ask the company, hey, what's it going to take for me to get to the next level? And the
Yeah.
level after that, how do I become the general manager of a business? That's it's the kind of question that people should be asking in their performance reviews. What's the path I need to be? What's my resume needs to look like? Because if you look at all the great companies right now, in most instances, the people that are running those companies are not the people that were the founders, right?
Right.
Whether you look at Google, whether you look at Microsoft and, Satya Nadella there and whatever, Adobe and, all these, the people that are running those companies are people that kind of went through the ranks and, paid their dues and did different things in the company and now understand the company more broadly. And that's where the board is saying to them that, yeah, these are the guys that we want for taking our companies into the next level of things. And that's why usually it so does happen that when the founders are not able to take that step of becoming big business, Fortune 500 oriented, that the board usually finds somebody else that can actually do that job.
Yeah.
And so you can look at all our top companies, and they're all being run by someone other than the founder. Other than, I think, Elon Musk is the
Uh-huh.
exception to that.
Yeah. Right.
But he's an exception to a lot of things.
Right. He is.
So there's that.
Yeah. Yeah. So Sandeep, I mean, you literally like wrote the book on cognitive branding. So maybe let's turn to that. So your book, Branding Between the Ears, what brought you to write the book, and then talk a little bit about what's in there and what you're focused on.
Yeah, so the book Branding Between the Years, it's It's kind of that literally what the title says, which is
Yes.
really understanding what's going on between your ears, which is presumably your brain, so to speak, which is how do you think and how do you listen, how do you understand it, how do you sort of use that knowledge to shift behaviors in the industry, shift, bring people along to new technologies. And I think that's very important as, as entrepreneurs go around to inventing. And I think that we're seeing some of the fastest change ever, particularly with artificial intelligence coming in. I think that, I feel like things have just accelerated,
Right.
and we're going to get new products, new theories, new systems, all happening at an accelerated pace, faster than people can keep up with it. So I think you will need the kinds of ideas that are buried in branding between the years. And it's not just purely about branding. It's, as I said, it's really about behavior shifting. And, so people are going to have to understand how to do that. So what the book does, the book is in kind of in three parts. So the first part of the book is just a general setup, which basically gives you, from a very non-technical perspective, how the human mind works.
Okay.
So this is not, this is not this is not a chapter on, neurophysiology, although it draws on all of those things. I mean, I went and researched those papers and we did all of those things. But the book is designed to be written for someone that is not a neurophysiologist, that it's a person is a brand manager,
Mm.
an entrepreneur, and so on. So, but it gives them the framework for how does the human brain work, essentially. Then the next part is about what a guy, a very famous guy who recently passed away several months back, Daniel Kahneman, would won a Nobel Prize for his thinking. So he had sort of come up with this theory of system one and system two, and
Okay.
essentially basically said that, hey, system two is all about rational thinking, and that's when your brain is sort of, when you're evaluating your mortgage or you're doing a spreadsheet, you're doing kind of rational thinking, mathematics, logic trees, pros and cons, and all of those types of things. And then he said, then there are things you do instinctively,
Mm.
and those things can be very complex, but you do them instinctively. So then the book breaks down how you can essentially go down those paths, system two or system one, instinctive or deliberative, and use those kinds of levers. And it breaks down, in each case, it breaks those down into 8 different levers and says, how could you use those levers and understand which lever to use for the products and services that you have?
Huh.
How much are you going to use the rational levers, the system twos and the system ones? And then sort of move people along. And the last chapter, the last section, sorry, it's book one, book two, book three. Sort of book three is more about implementation.
Okay.
So book two is about strategy. Book three is about, these are not separate books, these are just sections in the same book.
Right.
So the third part is about implementation and what kind of things you run into as far as implementing those things is concerned. So the book is designed to be it's to be honest, it's a book on advanced branding,
Okay.
but it's written in a way that even somebody's mom could read it and sort of use it to set up her baking shop. So not to sort of typify moms into doing baking shop. Moms are running big companies these days, we know that. But whether they're going to set up a baking shop or whether they're going to run a big company like an eBay, these ideas are fundamentally designed around those people being able to understand and go from point A to point B using some very advanced scientific principles that have been discovered in the last, I would say, 15 to 20 years,
Huh.
and put them to bear and do branding in a way that hasn't been done before. So I think that's where the innovation piece comes in.
Yeah. And maybe we think about like winning between the ears. Like how do I mean high level? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot to this. how
Yeah.
do great leaders or great brands like live rent free in people's lives? I mean, how do those, again, great leaders or great brands, whatever example you want to use,
Yeah. Yeah.
they're just there and it just sticks.
Yes. Yes. And I think Um, there are various principles for doing that. We talked about one earlier, which was around empathy. The other
Mm.
piece is around you can also do it by aligning your brands to people, people's values. Now, this is one of the most difficult ones to do, and I usually don't recommend it. But if you look at brands like Patagonia,
Mm.
and you look at brands like Ben and Jerry's, they're kind of out there, they're controversial, and by nature, if you align your brand around certain values, you're going to be controversial.
Yeah.
But those brands, people feel like, okay, Ben and Jerry's is not just an ice cream. It's an ice cream. It's a really an ice cream that actually makes a statement about things that matter to me. Or Patagonia, people are very loyal to the Patagonia brand because the principles that the founder had, and the founder, as you might remember, gave away all of his whole fortune away to
Right.
for good causes and so on. But those are brands that have stuck to certain values around green sustainability and so on, and then people that associate themselves with those values, those brands are absolutely top of mind for them. In other instances, it could be what we call brands with wisdom, which is where as you go through life, there are certain principles and so on that become embedded in your mind, right? So, for example, one of the principles that people have is simple is better,
Mm.
right? And people will tell you not to overcomplicate things, or they'll give you the principle of the Occam's razor that
Uh-huh.
given a problem, the simpler answer is the better answer, which by the way is not always true. you know if you took the simple answer in designing an airplane, we would have a lot more airplanes falling out of the sky. Somebody has to actually do the complex answer, but nonetheless, for most of life people would believe that the simple answer is the better answer. So there are a number of brands that have positioned themselves around it. So if you remember, this goes back a while, but Staples
Uh-huh.
had a branding campaign around the easy button. They had this big
Right.
red button,
Yes.
which was kind of like the easy button. You have a problem with whatever office supplies or anything, don't do a spreadsheet, just press the easy button. Easy button means just go to them and buy whatever you need there, right? So making that a simple thing. HEB had this whole campaign around um, their pre-prepared meals, and
Mm.
and their campaign was, life's already crazy, and why make it worse? Just take one of our meals, right? So this was kind of aimed at people that are really busy coming back from their work and so forth, and why sit around saying, oh, what kind of nutrition do I need? Maybe I should have something that has more fiber. Maybe I should have something, just take this prepared meal, and this has. So I think aligning that with an idea that is already in your mind, taking my brand and aligning it with an idea that you already accepted through your life. You already accepted through your life that the simple answer is the better answer. Simple is better. So if I make my brand also say that it is the simple choice,
Mm.
then it automatically becomes top of mind for you. So it is in the book, I cover many of these things which have become, if you will, common wisdoms.
Okay.
You and or another wisdom is, or another inset belief from people's life is that if there's something that I've built myself with my own hands,
Uh-huh.
then it's better,
Right. Yeah.
right? And this is why this is called the IKEA effect, because people will go and buy stuff from IKEA. They'll build a shelf which can come with an instruction set which is
Oh,
37 steps long with
unbelievable.
parts A and B and so
Yes.
on. They'll build this whatever cabinet. They obviously miss some step in between.
Yes, exactly right.
There's,
Always.
it's not, but they're going to tell all their neighbors. And if you go visit there, they'll say it's a fantastic thing and that they built it
Uh-huh.
themselves. And they're going to truly believe that it is the best cabinet in the world. Why? Because their hands were in it.
Mm.
And I think so, people, that's where you see lots of brands which, allow you to customize things and do some things yourself. Because when you do that, you automatically believe that thing is actually better than anything else in the world. So it's kind of really understanding what these principles are. And, we have done the deciphering through our research and the work that my company has been doing, we've done the deciphering around what these principles are. So then if you're sitting there as a brand marketer, you can take a list of these principles that we have and say, would this work for, would simple answer work for my brand? Would, do it myself work for my brand? Would empathy work for my brand? Would values work? So you can it helps you open up your thinking. At the end of the day, you'll have to pick one of those approaches. You can't do all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll have to pick one of them, but it gets the thinking going. And sometimes the most important thing that you can do in branding is to identify the right idea that's going to work for your business. And then you can, then after that, you can do quant and market research and so on to figure out, how far it'll go and all that stuff. And that's the easy part. Coming up with the idea and positioning it down the right corridor, which is what cognitive branding is that's the challenging piece. So, hopefully the book provides people that guidance.
Yeah. How about what future trends or opportunities are you most excited about, and and how you position the firm or yourself
Yeah.
to contribute or
Yeah.
benefit from those?
Well, I think, it's hard not to be influenced and fascinated by all the, with all the things that are happening with technology these days,
Hmm.
so particularly artificial intelligence. I think that's really, really big, particularly with what's going on with agentic AI.
Yes.
Um, at some point in the future, which I think maybe 10 years, within the next 10 years, quantum computing is going to be also a big deal. And and what happens is that when you combine in the future, 10 years from now, when you combine quantum computing and AI together, you see, AI is still based on conventional computing methods, the
Hmm.
bits, the zeros and ones. Quantum is not. Quantum is based on waves. And when you combine those two things together, it's going to create another transformational step, which will be fascinating to see. But nonetheless, I mean, even today, I think artificial intelligence is kind of the biggest thing that everyone should be really looking at, and we're using it very heavily in the work that we do. And it's also tied, by the way, interestingly enough, to the the book one section of my book. You remember I talked about system one and system two from
Yes.
Kahneman. And what system two is the rational piece. What system one is the instinctive piece. And computers have always done the system two to piece very well.
Yep.
We know that computers can outdo us in math problems and decision trees. Once you program them, they do these things exceptionally well. We play chess games and so on, all those things that they've done, which is all about deliberative thinking, algorithmic thinking, and so on. And computers do that very well. I think what has happened with the advent of deep learning and
Mm.
AI is that incredibly computers are doing things on the instinctive side very well.
Yes.
And nobody thought that was possible. People didn't think, the people always say, and people still say this, oh, but the computer can't think, but the computer can't feel, but the computer can't, whatever, they can't be instinctive, um, they can't feel love, and so on. But really, what we're finding is that these things are coming pretty damn close,
Yes.
and the reason is that when everything that happens in our brain, according to Kahneman, is because of system one and system two. System two, computers were already doing, but with this new AI technology, there is this, whatever you might call it, emergent phenomena or what, but they've started doing the instinctive piece very well, because you have to ask yourself, well, how do we do instinctive things? We really do them by, you know, reacting to, when we say we're reacting to things instinctively, we are reacting to them by correlating
Mm.
things with what we observe, you see. And for example, even if we go back a million years and you were a caveman, you could pretty reasonably predict when it was going to be night and when it was going to be day,
Hmm.
right? And you didn't have to understand how the celestial bodies moved,
Right. Right.
right? You don't have to solve any equations. You could say, yeah, I know it's going I know it's in a couple of hours, it's going to be, like daytime,
Hmm.
because you had seen that correlation that day out, day in and day out, that it's night for so long and then it's daytime for so long, and it happens every day. So you kind of understand day and night. And what has happened is with these, so that's instinct. You could say that's instinct. The caveman instinctively knew it was going to be day and night and all that stuff. But what is happening is now with the computers fed in, you know, millions of nodes and correlating millions of nodes and saying, okay, the computer says, I don't understand how all these things are happening, but I know when these factors are present, this happens.
Yep.
And all these things light up, this person is sad. When all these things light up, this person is happy, or this, all those, they don't know why it happened. Even we don't know why it happens.
Right.
Even
Right.
as
Right.
humans, we don't know why exactly when, what makes for happiness and what all those types of things. But computers are also beginning to use AI is essentially where the computers are beginning to use that the variables that they observe and use those variables to make certain conclusions without necessarily knowing what the logic is of how those things work, right? And that's why it's so difficult, because when people try to decompose these AI models, they can't figure out how these AI models are doing certain things that they're doing.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, I think, and we're seeing it in marketing and business. So, this is not a theoretical thing. You can take a real person, like you can take a artificial customer service person, and you can take a real customer service function. Take 100 of these and 100 of those, and then you let them field calls, and you see who are the ones that are handling them better. And when does the person that's listening to the call, because they don't know whether it's a human answering or a
Right.
person answering,
Right.
which calls are being rated high? Where is the customer saying that this person that took my call understood what I was saying, and I really felt like they connected with me, and and I felt happy about the outcome. You're finding increasingly that the AI is outperforming humans. And then you say, well, but they can't really feel, they can't really love, well, but they just did all those things. And those are
Right.
real examples. And I think it's going to take a while for people to really let that sink in. Remember what I said, behavior changes slowly.
Right.
We get stuck in these things. And I was there too. I mean, in my book, I actually wrote that I don't think AI is going to displace humans anytime soon. I said, yeah, it took them so long to learn how to drive, whereas, even a person with, a below average IQ can learn to drive, right? And so I said it's going to be a long time but I think I was wrong. I think I was wrong. I think we're going to get to artificial general intelligence, which is where intelligence exceeds human intelligence. Within the next 10 years, maybe sooner, maybe in 5. I don't know. I think it's a very interesting time. I don't feel scared about it. I think it's a great. Everybody should sit and educate themselves on it and figure out how it can be helpful in their lives. And I think there's a lot of positive. I think there's a lot of positive out there, outside of the scary stories and Terminator and all that movies and all that stuff. I think there's a lot of I think there's a lot of positive to be had as well.
Yeah. And how do you see all that applying to cognitive branding and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Um, I think in the future, certainly, artificial intelligence can help us think through some of those human behaviors even more broadly. Right now, the conclusions that are in my book and the outlines that are in my book are based on whatever the 2 decades of consulting work. So it took 2 decades to actually learn all those things. I think now computers are going to be looking at all of this stuff. They'll read my book in like 5 seconds,
Yes.
maybe 5 microseconds, and everybody else's book. And then, so they're going to be able to put that knowledge to bear, as well as they're going to be able to bring new knowledge. I think a lot of times people assume that these things just consume the existing literature that's out there and then regurgitate it. But I think increasingly we're seeing in AI that it's coming up with new stuff that is not necessarily in that literature. I think the big test is going to be when the next book on cognitive branding, which takes a step beyond, cognitive branding was a step beyond what existing branding was. And then the next book that comes out, if that's written totally by AI, then, that'll be a real benchmark achievement by AI technology. I think, but more. So that's in the space of cognitive branding. But yeah, but I think it's going to strengthen it. It's going to challenge our thinking, and it's going to come up with some answers that we haven't come up with yet. I think so. That's a big piece. Another big piece in terms of cognitive branding is some of the work that Elon Musk's companies are doing, which is around Neuralink, which is
Right.
sort of putting electrodes directly into the human brain and so forth. But one of the things that hasn't been done, well, let me not say hasn't been done, but needs a lot, another big technology that will be a technology in the future is to add new senses to humans. So
Mm,
right now we just have, you know, not to give a complex answer, but we have basically five senses.
right.
Actually, there are more, but let's not go there. Five senses we have. And the funny thing about a sense, and senses are very important in branding because we when we are designing brand experiences, we try to see what you're seeing, what you're smelling, what you're tasting. You want the whole thing to be considered and have a strategy around every single sense. And you form your opinions and your impressions about brands using all your senses.
Mm,
And but what will happen in the future is that they're going to put devices into you which are going to give you new senses that you don't have.
wow.
So, and I think, and that's a very interesting piece because, a sense, the definition of a sense, by the way, is that it's so irreducible that you can never explain a sense to another person
Huh.
if they don't have that sense.
Interesting.
You can never explain, so a person that is, for whatever reason, blind from, you'll never be able to explain colors and you won't be able to explain what it means to have sight to them because they've never had that. And so I think adding new senses is kind of a whole different thing, so that's like giving you the power, the bats, for example. Your bats can do radio waves and so on. So,
Right.
what if there was some device here and then you could actually directly take radio waves and they go directly to your brain and it's just like smelling something you'd have radio, just like a bat. So in the future, you may have five augmented senses that are added on top of your five natural senses. And that'll completely change your experience of the brands. It'll change your experience of life, the world, everything, but
Yes.
it'll change your experience of the brand, to keeping to the book. And but the principles still apply, which is around understanding how that is all processed between the years.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Crazy stuff, huh?
Yes. How about any advice you'd give to young or aspiring entrepreneurs or again, whether they're young or they're coming out of corporate looking into getting into the entrepreneurial world as it relates to cognitive branding or in any way, any advice
Yeah,
you'd give to
yeah.
those folks?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for young people, um, certainly be self-aware. It's good to be young. That's a real thing that gives you the runway in life to do things. And if they're coming out now from schools and so on, I mean, it's a great time to be alive. I mean,
Yes,
just
it
the
is.
things that are happening in the world with all this technological transformation and so on. Wow. I mean, it's an amazing time. It's an amazing time to be alive and an amazing time to be young. I think in some of the themes that we talked about, Kip, I think those are the things that they should focus on. There's a lot of things they're going to be able to learn from books, but
Mm,
there are other things that just have to be experienced. So, I think young people should seek out experiences, put yourself in uncomfortable situations,
mm.
don't just sit in, wherever you are. If you're in Idaho, just don't spend your whole life in Idaho, get out, do more things, go to other countries, experience different things, meet different people that are not like you know, because every time you do that, you're the person that's learning.
Yes.
You're the person that's learning. So it's all very selfish in that sense. You're doing that. You're doing all these things because it's actually making you a different person.
Mm,
And so I think experience, self-awareness, a thirst for learning. These are the kinds of things. Listening. These are the kinds of things that you have to learn to do, and you're not going to find it in a book. Surround yourself with mentors. You
mm.
know, learn from the people that have made those darn mistakes already.
Yes.
Yeah, let let the guy who fell off the cliff tell you his experience, right? I mean, you don't need to do that yourself necessarily. So certain experiences you can skip, but and that's where having mentors helps because people can sort of focus you down the right. And a lot of times when I do mentoring for kids coming out of school, I just tell them, what do you want? What is it? What kind of career do you want to be in? And I can tell you what your next 30 years are going to look like
Mm.
because, for many of those things, that's pretty well known. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, I can tell you what the next 30 years are. If you're going
Yeah.
to be a consultant, I can tell you what the next 30 years. If you're going to be and I can't tell you for everything. If you want to be a doctor, go sit with somebody that's, you know, been a doctor for the last 30 years, and he'll be able to tell you
Yes.
what it's going to look like for the next 30 years. So I think having that openness and recognizing that um, there are answers that lie beyond your own is an important thing. Sometimes you can feel like you have all the answers, especially when you're young, but surrounding yourself with the right mentors uh, and exploring, what other
Mm.
things are out there is good. I think that can be a positive for people. I don't know if I answered your question. I don't know.
Yeah.
That sort of I went off in a particular direction, but hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. And maybe along those lines, would you suggest people come out of school? I mean, just like with the experiences, touch and taste different industries and different careers. Don't, instead of thinking literally like this is the only thing I'm going to do and like I'm just going on this path to try
Yeah,
different things when you're young and fail and just try
yeah,
things before because you don't really know what you're going to like. Or
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
you disagree. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think I mean you don't want to fail for the sake of failing, of course. I
Right.
mean, I think, but you don't want to be afraid of failing. I think
Mm.
that's there. But I think the most important thing is what I find with, people coming out of school, young MBAs, graduates, undergrad, whatever. I feel like they just haven't exposed themselves to enough people and, learning things that they could learn without necessarily having, running into a wall.
Yes.
You know, you don't have to run into a wall. Go ask somebody else who's run into a wall before, you
Mm.
know, and then, you can. So I think what you can learn from other people's experiences, you should seek it out. And, people like me who have whatever, you know, we'll, we'll be happy to, I always take those phone calls and talk to people, right? And I think that people will do want to help others. Take advantage of that. Talk to people. I think young people, I feel like they don't talk enough to other people.
Yes.
They'll say, "Oh, I want to be whatever." I want to be a doctor, or gee, I want to be a high school teacher or whatever. Okay, fine. Then go talk to some of those people.
Right.
and see people who have been there for 15 years, just kind of see what if it is what you think it is, right? Because there's no need. So I think learn from experiences, but if other people have experienced those things, go also learn from their experiences. I mean, that's just human, and that'll open up. It'll make you a better person. It'll open up your options in a better way. You'll be a more informed person is a more prepared person,
Very
right?
good.
So I think those things are important. The other thing is the young people are they're often shy. You know,
Right. I know.
they haven't. Many of them I don't think have like picked up a phone and made a cold call
That's
to somebody. You know
exactly
what I'm saying?
true. It's
So just
shocking.
saying, hey, you know what? I'm gonna, most likely Kip won't talk to me, but what the hell? I'm just gonna pick up the phone and try to call him and see if I get through.
Right.
That kind of willingness to, that's a small risk. That kind of a willingness to take a small risk and take a small hit. Maybe Kip will say, yeah, no, you know what, kid, I don't have time to deal with this right now. Thank you very much, but go talk to somebody. Having that thick skin to take that kind of a little failure here and
Uh-huh.
there and so on and things out, that's okay. It strengthens you. It
Right.
strengthens you. I've had that. I mean, trust me, I've had that happen many, many times in my life where I've reached out to people and, they didn't want to talk to me,
Uh-huh.
you know. But that's okay. That's okay. You move on. You move on to
Right.
for every, we do a lot of consulting work. For every 10 bids that we prepare, we maybe win two.
Uh-huh.
So for every two wins that we have to face failure eight times where the client or the prospective client felt like we were not good enough and somebody else was, or whatever. I mean, and you can't let that stop you.
Right.
You just keep moving, moving, moving. And I think that is having a strength. And by the way, I'll also say this, that many times when we have been in those situations where somebody has said, "Oh, you know what, we're not hiring you," many times they've come back later. That
Absolutely.
they said, "Hey, we got this proposal from you, and you said this, and we didn't buy into it. But you know what? We saw that 3 years later that some of those things panned out, and now with the next project, 3 years later, we want to do this work with you."
Hmm.
I've had that happen with people, like with one of the clients that I work with. He was giving me such a hard time. It's like, okay, this and that, you're charging me too much money and this, and what am I going to do with these things and so forth. I said, okay, fine, whatever. Finish my work. Uh, 3 years later, that client sets up his own company and he calls me and said, hey, I need you to do some work for me. I said, wait a minute. You're the guy that didn't like me that said, hey, this is what kind of work you're doing. It's not of useful to me and you're charging me too much. And now it's your own money. That time it wasn't even your own money. Now it's your own money and you're calling me. And
Uh-huh.
he said, well, you know what? You were right at that time. And those things played out. So that's why now when I have my own business, I want to use you. And I think some of these things have an interesting way of playing out. And that's where life flows where it flows. But you got to be bold. But bold doesn't mean uninformed.
Hmm.
You know, so inform yourself, talk to people, experience things, and have fun while doing that.
Right. Perfect. All right. Final question. Success. What is your personal definition of success? And you can take that any direction that you want.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great, I think that's an interesting question. Success, I think it is multiple pieces. I think material success also matters.
Hmm.
Sometimes people minimize that, but I think do uh, in life, having material success, whether that's money, whether that's whatever, um, is important. And then secondly, if you can do that while also having the time of your life, then
Yes.
that's an amazing success. And I think I can say that. for myself that I've been doing consulting for the last whatever 25 years, and I've really enjoyed it. I mean, I felt like it's given me what what I want, and it's given me material success also. And sometimes, when I'm talking to young people, they want to help other people. People are idealistic and they want to, be in the world, do good, and I think those are important things. What I find with and what I tell young people is to not minimize material success, because when you have material success, your ability to do good and your ability to help others magnifies by an
Absolutely.
order of magnitude. If you can barely help yourself, you're not going to help a lot of other people. It's not.
Right.
I mean, most of the time. I mean, I'm sure somebody will come up with an exception to that, but I'm just generalizing things here.
Right.
And, and you can see people at the extremes. Obviously not everybody is going to be a Bill Gates, but you can see, people like Bill Gates. He's not doing Microsoft and stuff now, but he's just spending all his time with his foundation. And he has set big goals like, eradicating malaria from the world, and he's able to take on big goals like that because he has that material strength.
Right.
Now, obviously, all of us are not going to be there, but in some form or fashion, you want to have that balance of being able to do things in which you're going to get personal satisfaction and personal enjoyment, and and have fun with it. But at the same time, you also need to balance it with material success, because that is when you can help and have more impact in the world. And that is when you can say to yourself that whatever this wherever I worked at place X, Y, and Z, and that place was a better place because I was there for a few years.
Mhm.
You want to be able to say that to yourself, and you want to be able to say that to yourself that whatever in whatever little way, in your little world, that little world was a better place because you were in it. You know.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Sandeep, this has been fantastic, fascinating, super valuable, and just really a pleasure starting to get to know you. So thank you for your time. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
not at all, not at all. I mean, I think if you will allow me, I'll just flash my book
Oh,
on the
absolutely.
screen.
Yes.
So this is the book. It's called Branding Between the Years, and for people who want to just kind of explore a number of these things that Kip has brought out. I think they can do that. And my website is sandeepdayal.com, and our company website is sorrenti.com. And for people that are interested in these kinds of ideas, I think they'll find many of those in the book. But I have to say, Kip, it's been just such a pleasure talking to you. I didn't know what we'd be talking about, but whatever it was, I think it was just so wonderful having this chance to connect with you, but also to connect with your audience.
Oh, absolutely. And we will share on the show notes how to get in touch with you, how to get in touch with Sorrenti Marketing, how to buy branding between the ears. And by the way, I love the cover of the book. I mean, I don't know if that's cognitive branding there, but I love
Yeah,
that cover. That's very attractive for a cover. So, but Sandeep Dayal, thank you so much. This is fantastic. Really appreciate you.
great, Kip.
All right.
Anytime.